We'll start in with our agenda for our special municipal council meeting today on Tuesday, November 25th.
No, we're continuing the agenda from today. This is tonight.
Oh, yeah.
It's a special topic.
Okay, let's start again. We are continuing our council meeting that started this morning at 9 o'clock. We had a lovely break for lunch, and now we're back, resuming our meeting. Thank you for correcting me. This afternoon, we are going to deal with our municipal planning strategy, and before we start into that, congratulations to our planning department and our staff. They have been the recipients of international recognition for their work on coastal protection, and they deserve a little round of applause from us all. It's an international award, and it's between, as I understand, includes both Australia, the Commonwealth, so don't ask me all the Commonwealth countries. My geography lesson or civics lesson or whatever is sadly lacking. But congratulations for that work and for the recognition for that. We are going to move on to other planning discussions, and that will be around our municipal planning strategy. And today we will spend the next 2 hours and 15 minutes or so working our way through a document that you've prepared to help us as a council focus our attention on decisions related to key areas within the municipal planning strategy and the related bylaws that would support that. So I will turn it over. Reid, I think, is going to take us through this, and we'll start with that.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So today is one of a few workshops to gather direction from council as we as staff start to prepare a second draft of the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw. So to just recap, where the direction of this work comes from, there's a provincial requirement that all municipalities adopt comprehensive planning documents. So these documents need to cover all lands, and they need to cover certain types of areas within those documents. So some of those relate to what are called the statements of provincial interest, as well as what the province has called minimum planning requirements. And those cover kind of several broad topics, but they don't give us kind of clear direction exactly about what that looks like. And then there's a whole other set of I guess you could say optional or pieces that most planning strategies cover that relate to other types of topics. Heritage, transportation, environmental protection will be some of those topics. The public engagement process as part of this, of course you would recall that we wrapped up a significant process this spring and summer on the first draft. And so the last time we were here was in October when we were delivering the What We Heard report from that. So it was a comprehensive kind of document that covered all the different topic areas that we heard from. Some topics we heard a lot about, other ones we didn't. But what this is intended to do today, and with the report that you have, is to get direction on how you would like us to proceed with that second draft. So this is not about saying this is a final decision, but it's providing a much closer fit for what council would like to do and what would like to see in that document as it gets closer to being at the end of the process. So we're aware of several topic areas that absolutely, particularly from the public, we heard there's a need to change direction. There are other topics that didn't get a lot of airtime, and there's a need to ensure that the direction is correct on those items. And so it's small writing, but on the right side, I just basically copied over what's on our engagement site, but just covers off what those next steps are. Once we have the direction on all of these different topic areas, We'll then go back in January and craft a draft number 2. And then the next piece of that would be to share that with yourselves as well as the public, starting in basically February, March of 2026. So that's kind of the intention with these couple of meetings. So there's today, and then next week we have another one, and then 2 weeks after that there will be hopefully kind of a wrap up to ensure that all of the direction we need is there, so that early in the new year we'll start into the draft number 2. So what I'm going to do is we're going to share the overview today, but what we'll do is provide just a very brief overview, the same information that's in the report, an overview of what that topic area is, and then a slide showing some different options that council may want to go in. Where we've underlined, and in the report we've outlined what the staff recommendation is for that. It's fairly brief in these documents, but we're happy to kind of answer questions if you'd like a little bit more explanation of the rationale for some of those options. We're going to be kind of basically taking note of council's direction on each item. And so at the end of today, what we'll do is Rosemary will just put her document on the screen, and we'll briefly go over those just to ensure that we're on the same page about, the specific direction related to each topic, so that we can then go away, and then when we come back to you next time, we'll have a set of new questions or directions as well. These are just, you can go so many different directions with this stuff. We've tried to illustrate options that either align with what the public wants or what we've heard from you so far, or what kind of meet best planning practices, but there's no set requirements. If council decides they like what they're seeing in one of those options, but there's a particular piece they'd like to change, that's fine. We'll just make sure that we capture that so that we're all on the same page about what you'd like to see in the next draft. So with that, I'll run the slides, but I'll hand it over next to Anna, and we'll just get started with our first topic.
Okay, so we're going to start with livestock operations. I'm just going to provide a brief overview of livestock operations in MODL, and a lot of these points we've talked about at previous council workshops, and they're also outlined in the report. So some concerns related to the practice of keeping livestock include land use conflicts. So these can include things like noises and odor, and they can arise when barns and manure storage facilities are located close to residential or institutional uses. And there is also the possibility of watercourse and well contamination from manure runoff. Existing farms are experiencing increased pressures from encroaching development, which can result in land use conflicts as well. To help address these concerns, other Nova Scotian municipalities and even some MODL secondary planning areas have included regulations that either limit livestock and or require setbacks to address land use conflicts. The province has manure management guidelines which recommend setbacks for new livestock operations from nearby uses. However, these are just guidelines and not a requirement for farmers. The management of livestock is not a statement of provincial interest or considered minimum planning. So now we're going to get into some of the policy options related specifically to setbacks for new barns and manure storage structures. So while the province does not require municipalities to have setbacks for barns and manure storage facilities, these setbacks can help to minimize land use conflicts and reduce potential environmental contamination. So here are some options to consider. Option number 1, do not create categories for livestock or place any limitations on livestock operations, including backyard agriculture, such as chickens. This is considered minimum planning. Basically, the option is to not regulate livestock anywhere in the municipality. So this is not a provincial requirement to regulate livestock. It would mean permitting all livestock, including backyard chickens, and it would require no setbacks for related structures from watercourses, wells, homes, or etc. And then looking at option number 2, which is do not create categories for livestock, but require setbacks or limit the number of livestock in certain zones. So this option would not regulate livestock everywhere, but it would apply regulations where there's a higher likelihood of land use conflicts happening, such as denser residential subdivisions. An example of this approach could include setting limits for the number of pigs or chickens and requiring certain lot sizes to keep these animals in denser residential areas. And then our last option here is option number 3. So use an animal unit approach to apply different setback distances for barns and manure storage structures by categorizing the scale of livestock operation. This could also include limiting the number of chickens for backyard agricultural uses on small residential lots. This option would help to address land use conflicts and support environmental protection, but it would be the most restrictive option. So considering the amount of opposing resident feedback on this topic and the fact that it is not a provincial requirement, staff recommend the first option, which is to not place any limitations on livestock operations. While this would mean that new livestock-related structures, such as barns and manure storage facilities, would be subject to no setback requirements from neighboring homes, wells, or watercourses, it was clear that residents do not want this type of regulation on livestock.
Are we listening? We're listening. Are we listening to the whole presentation, or do we speak to each one?
We're going to go through this piece by piece
Yeah.
because
Okay, good.
the staff need very clear direction. So we want to be very specific in what our comments are and our conclusions. And I think it's better we work our way through it and then. So you're next,
Okay, thank
Councillor
you.
Moore.
Option number 1, of course. And as for a barn or something being built too close to someone's house or whatever, but there are guidelines. I don't want to tell somebody that they can't put their barn this close to the house or whatever, and if they're that stupid, well then, but there are guidelines with the province about storage of manure. So there's guidelines, so people should adhere to that. So I'm supporting option 1. To have no, do not create categories. To have no regulations, yeah. Just my thought.
Councillor Burns.
Unsurprisingly, I'm also in support of option 1. Thank you.
Well,
This is probably the area we had the most discussion on and the most, I would say, resistance to was around controlling livestock numbers. So having it captured as a recommendation, I think really does reflect what we heard and what was really a contentious point with our residents. But having said that, I did have calls from people who have particular situations where they are annoyed by the livestock that's around them. And I just want to be on record to say that we did have many people who did not want this, but we have also heard a much smaller number who are very concerned about where they live and how they have to interact with the neighbors' animals and particularly chickens and roosters. So I just want to be on record to say that we did hear from people, but the very larger number was on less restriction around this. Councillor Smith.
I support option 1 as well because of the feedback that we received. I kind of want to say for now, because this is a living document, and as we move into creating more high-density housing, possibly, in the future, we may want to revisit this for certain zones. Also, people can, once we're finished all of this, communities could, I'm thinking of like a lakeshore community, for example, they could come together as a special planning area and create a regulation around this. Am I right?
Yeah, there's always a potential to create an additional, neighborhood-specific zone or policy. Typically, in this process, we are looking to create fairly consistent regulations that are reflected across the municipality. We do have quite a work plan ahead of us when it comes to revisiting the existing secondary planning areas and bringing those up to today's standards. Many of them are past the point that they should have been reviewed already. So in terms of, thinking about things that may be more, local and specific to neighborhoods, I guess what I would say is that would have to occur kind of at the end of those other things. There's quite a few additional priorities that would be kind of first up, and in reviewing those other plans, it would be the first priority once this is in place. I should mention as well that just to specify that this is talking about new barns and new manure storage. So this is a regulation piece that falls more on a farmer or a homeowner in terms of where their things can be located. Then once council provides the direction on this, then we're going to talk about what about the new development that's occurring around. And so this isn't talking about both. It's only about the farmer or the barns. The next one is going to be talking about the new development that might be located close by. So just there's a clear separation between those.
Can I ask a question about the secondary planning strategy that we have in place now? If we go forward with this option with no livestock restrictions, then how does that sit with planning strategies, secondary planning strategies that have embedded in them livestock restrictions?
Our intent would be that, similar to draft 1, draft 2 would basically contain those secondary plans within this document, but the plans that are in effect now would continue to be in effect unless there are certain topics in this larger document the council wants to have kind of override. And this is certainly not an area that I would recommend that you do that. And so in the first draft, there was 1 or 2 items that were contained that suggested doing that. But it makes a lot more sense to go to those communities individually and see what they'd like to do. And at that time, they'll have a chance to see what's applied now in the rural areas around them, and then see what they want to do with those zones. So they will be in effect, continue to be in effect.
I think that's an important point to clarify, because there's some other things too, like on RVs, at least one of the has some restrictions that are quite different than what's in this. So other comments people want to make? I am assuming silence is consent to option 1 as it's proposed here, agreeing with that. I'm seeing nodding of heads, which means that we're agreeing to not create categories for livestock or place any limitations on livestock operations. Okay? Let's move on then.
Okay, so the next one is looking at setbacks for new developments. So this would be things like residential or institutional developments from existing farms. So this type of regulation can help address the issue that some farms are facing around encroaching development. And it's a requirement that would minimize the potential for nuisance complaints and land use issues associated with livestock without impacting existing farms. So to further specify, the setback would apply to the structures themselves and not the property lines. So even though this is not mandatory, it would still support the protection of agricultural lands, and this is a statement of provincial interest. This approach is even listed in the MGA, so the Municipal Government Act, as an option for municipalities to consider when trying to protect agricultural lands. So moving on to the options. So option number 1 is to require no setbacks for new residential or institutional land uses from existing barns from manure storage facilities. So this would be considered minimum planning. There is no provincial requirement to have the specific regulation. However, agricultural lands must be protected somehow. This option does not address the issue around encroaching development near farms. And then option 2 is to require a 50-meter setback for new residential or institutional land uses from existing barns or manure storage facilities. This option does support the protection of agricultural lands to some extent, and it also helps to protect existing farms from encroaching development and associated land use conflicts. And then option number 3 is to require a 150-meter setback distance for new residential and institutional land uses from existing barns or manure storage facilities. And it's basically the same approach as option number 2, but a larger setback distance to support a higher level of protection for farms. So staff recommend option 3 to require a 150-meter or 492 feet setback distance for any new residential or institutional development from existing livestock operations, as this would help to direct future growth and development away from established agricultural areas and minimize the potential for future land use conflicts with other uses. This approach would also provide the greatest level of protection for farms and will support the protection of agricultural lands without putting limitations on farmers.
Councillor Hobley.
We're ready for comments, questions?
Yes.
Okay,
all good.
perfect.
Thanks.
So I do think that option 3, I think the setback distance is too large. It does state here, if option 2 offers more flexibility for non-agriculture uses while still protecting existing farms from encroaching development. I don't want to go too much too soon, so I support option 2.
Councillor Moore.
So, so this means that if someone has a farm and the land next to it, someone sells for a housing development, that, say we go with option 2, say 50 meters. So that housing development would have to be built 50 meters from the property line? No, 50 meters from,
50 meters from, say, a structure, so a barn or a manure storage facility, not the property line.
okay. Yeah, so in some places, there's a lot more than 50 meters between, yeah, right. Okay, so that's okay. And this has nothing to do with someone wanting to build a barn. Gotcha. Thank you. Okay.
Deputy Mayor Vino.
Piggybacking on what Councillor Moore had asked about guidelines for manure storage that are provincially regulated, is there anything in those guidelines that say it has to be so far from a property line?
Yes, there are guidelines for property lines.
Okay. Do you know what that is? You don't have to know, but do you happen to know what it is?
I don't want to
Okay,
say the
but
wrong
there is
number.
something
Yes,
that
there
says
is. Yeah, sorry, I'm not
that's already in
100%
place.
on that,
Okay.
but.
Councillor Burns.
Is the flip side of this that new barns and new manure facilities, like, just so I understand the regulations, is how could this disadvantage the farms that we're looking to protect? Is that going to happen, or is this just for new developments? I'm thinking someone builds a new development and they say, no, we want a new barn, but the best place for it because of the slope or whatever is 30 meters, not 50. Yeah.
I think the intent is to not burden existing farms, so it would just apply for new residential related development. Yeah.
Just further to that, because my question is a similar, where you might have a farmstead and you want to build another house on that property, which can, does happen. These restrictions then they don't protect that other family member that might build a house on the farmstead.
It could be written in a way where you indicate off-property dwellings. So if there's an existing farm property and they were going to build another dwelling that's within that same property, we could specify in the regulations that it would only apply to off-site or off-property new dwellings in that case.
I think that should be a consideration, because we have farms where you have multiple generations that may live or may want to, and the location of the property their tolerance for living closer to the barns and buildings might be greater than somebody who's not used to that kind of lifestyle. I think giving that flexibility to the farm family will be really important. I would favor option 3 personally for new development around a farm, because I think that gives the kind of protection that farms appreciate and actually need, realistically, to feel that they can continue, even though we've got some legislation that, farm practices are protected. But I think if we're thinking about new developments, we should try to build bigger buffers around them, with the exception of being for these farmsteads where you're building another house on that farmstead. Councillor Reinhardt.
Yeah, before I thank you for clarifying that, because I had that same question, and I think that's a really important distinction to make. My question about these setbacks was, in any of the consultation, did you hear from farmers that this is something that they would appreciate? Did you hear that from the farming stakeholders?
Yeah, I think the big thing that we heard from farmers is that they support the protection of agricultural land. I don't recall many instances where this specific regulation was spoken about, but just generally speaking, they support the protection of agricultural land, and this is a way that it can happen. And especially at the stakeholder events, but also through the public, like we did hear about rising land use conflicts and the pressures that are happening from new development on existing farms. So this type of thing would help to address that as well.
Just to add to what Anna was saying, the stakeholder discussions that we did have were focused, most of the stakeholders that came to that were kind of larger farm operations, people involved with different types of livestock, chickens and things like that. Those people did speak specifically about some of the challenges with encroaching development, and people did weigh in on this specific issue through kind of some of the feedback stuff. But generally, people at those did support. They did speak about those conflicts from neighbors and the increase in the number of people around them, and the increase in people from different places that hadn't lived in the country before and things like that. And so they were raising some of those issues that this is trying to address.
Councillor Smith.
I wonder if you could just make super clear for me who this would impact, or who it would protect. So it's talking about existing livestock farms. So I'm just trying to think if, somebody has a barn, used to be used for livestock, but it's not currently, and a new development is going in. Does this apply even though the barn is no longer in use? Or what is a livestock farm under this definition? I'm just having trouble understanding who it applies to.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It would all depend on how we define as a livestock operation in the document. Originally, it was for the larger scale, and so we could clarify that this would apply in situations where there's, say, a commercial farm involved, or somehow establish a threshold or something that could sort of help with that definition. But again, veering away from regulating livestock or that kind of thing. So yeah, that is something that we would take back and sort of work out an approach for making sure that this type of regulation doesn't also just apply to, say, someone having a chicken coop in their backyard. There would need to be some sort of level of farming operation that this would apply to.
Yeah, I think that would be super helpful so that we're not catching up any like homesteaders in this.
That gets to a very sticky point in how you define a farm, and I think it gets to what Councillor Smith is getting at. The definition of a farm, we can go to provincial definition of a farm, CRA's definition of a farm. I don't think they're the same, actually. So I don't know how if that gets written into the regulations, because we have a large number of, we have way more, like 90% of what we have here, I would say, from a livestock perspective, are homesteaders who have a few animals in their backyard. I would say there's probably only 10% of what we would call people involved in farming that actually have any large numbers. And in this community, there's probably only one that I can think of that has like more than 150 head of cattle. There's a number that would be in that 100 to 150 head range, but there are very few of them, very few. So this is getting into, I don't want to get in the weeds on this, but I think we will get in the weeds on it when we start to try to define what a farm is. And to Councillor Smith's point, there are, most homesteads here have a barn on them. You know, they were built with a house and a barn, and the barn may not have had cattle or any animal in it for many years. So there's all of that that's kind of gray and fuzzy to me. I don't know if you can speak to that.
Yeah, a little bit. The first draft had a bunch of different pieces that had to work together. One of those pieces did try to separate different sizes of farm operations, and there was a large kind of scale operation, and that's really what the intention is with this, would be to really target the bigger scale one. So there won't be that many that would fall into this. We can't just take and separate out that definition from the first draft as it was. It needs to be tweaked so that it can work independently from the rest of those other regulations that are being taken out. But that would be the intention. We have lots of other examples to go from where this is a very common type of regulation. So I'm pretty confident that what we can come up with is something that is clearly understood from it has to work for the community, and also has to work from when we're reviewing applications and things like that, and trying to understand whether a regulation applies or doesn't apply. But we'll take that back and we'll use some of those other examples around the province that municipalities have definitions that will work to target the bigger size farms, and then make sure that it's something that would work here as well.
Councillor Moore.
Is there a regulation, a provincial regulation board or something that commercial farms have to register under? Whether it be dairy farm or beef farm? Yeah, I'm just saying, if there was, I mean, if those ones are commercial farms and they're working commercial farms and they're already registered, we could go by that. Like they would have to be registered, but I'm looking to see if there is anything.
Yeah, I think, and as the mayor's indicated, there's different definitions that the federal government uses and the province used to create a threshold, like certain farm income thresholds and things like that would start to define whether you can.
But definitions is one thing, but do they have an actual register? Yes?
Yeah, there is that process too, but it still doesn't cover every situation. So
Okay.
We'll look at all of that.
Yep.
And I think what we can come up with is something that works best. Most of the time, people kind of stray away from some of those definitions when they're just talking about a building and setbacks. They mostly look about what's in the barn.
Okay.
To say, well, if it's got 50 or if it's got 20 or whatever it is, head of cattle or something, then that's when it applies. But looking at the definition of whether that farm is operating as a certain type of business, they wouldn't use that for something like this. But we will absolutely look at some of those options and try to find the one that works best here.
Thank you.
So just wanted to be clear. We need consensus from council at a high level to move these forward. So if you are in favor of no setbacks, we need to hear that now. And if you are in favor of setbacks, so I think Pam gave a clear option 2. Elsbeth indicated that option 3 would she prefer, but a flexibility for farm families. And no one else has picked an option. So
The hands are going up.
so we need to, we don't have to have all the questions answered, and they're still going to be working each one, but either setback or no setback, and if it's setback, 50 or 150 or other.
Counselor Brooks and then Smith.
I would echo what the mayor has said. I like the idea of when we define what this, what the number is going to be to provide protection to existing farms, but I absolutely want protection to folks who already own that land. If they want to add multiple homes to it, I do not want to be the body telling them they can't use their land to do that. So we should try to find a way to have that language in the document so it's clear, people understand what we're trying to do.
Counselor Smith.
Yeah, with those clarifications that this is going to apply to large livestock operations or developments next to them, and the specification that the mayor mentioned, I'm in support of the third option.
Are there others that want to weigh in? Counselor Moore, did you have something more?
I like option 2 because we have to also be looking out. We're looking out for farmland, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't, because we should, and for the farmers. But what are we also doing to developers? So I'm going in the middle, and I'm going to support option 2.
Deputy Mayor Vino.
I as well am in support of option 2.
Counselor Burns.
Sorry. Okay. I would break from a lot of my messaging on this to go with either option 2 or 3. I would take the number of the setback really from people who have bigger expertise in this area than me on that. The reason here is that we're protecting people who are using the land now as it is. This isn't about protecting like future usage. It's if you have a farm, someone's not going to come in to your community and say that it's too difficult for you to continue to do that. So that's why the difference on this issue. I like that it protects like the people who are using the land. And I would just have to shake my head pretty hard at someone who bought into a new residential development 50 meters, so 150 feet away from a barn or a manure facility, and then thought this should change. 150 feet is not that far. That's here to the parking lot, right?
Meters.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, but it's 50 meters, so 150 feet, or 150 times 3, right? And either of those distances, with a reasonable amount of wind, you should know what you're buying next to. So I would just, while the setback is there, don't have a lot of sympathy for people who would build a large residential development next to an ongoing farm operation that close.
Counselor
Yeah, I would support option 3 as well. From the discussion, it sounds like it's only going to apply to, a few sort of larger scale firms. So I don't think it will be a big hardship for developers, just because it isn't going to be a really widespread application. So, and it shows, our support for protecting the agricultural land, which I think everyone here is supportive of, as well as the public. So,
Counselor Bell, did you want to weigh in? 2? Okay.
Number 2.
So I think we're tied.
What do we got?
Okay,
We're tied.
We can work with that.
It's split. Counselor Burns.
May I suggest that I think the difference that we'll ultimately land on between 150 meters and 50 meters is going to come down to the devil in the details about the size and scale that we're looking at, because if it's a few limited properties here, then 150 meters to me isn't a large
True.
issue. How
true.
far down does this go? Therefore, how many properties would it affect? I think is plays in the trade-off in my head. So I think, for what it's worth.
I don't know how clear that was.
Find us out how many big farms there are.
Actually, within.
Okay, I would say that when you come back with the next, I think what people are, if I can take the liberty to try to summarize, that the recognition for larger farming operations, I think the concern is around the fact we have a lot of homesteaders, smaller operations with just a few animals, and the restrictions shouldn't apply to that. To the larger operations, give them more space, protect their operation and their neighbors by giving them that protection. I think I'm reading that out of what people are saying. But we'll wait for the next version. If you can capture that somehow in your magic of writing, Councillor Moore.
One more question. So this is for new residential also, that if you have like a small scale farm, large scale farm, and the lot next to you was sold for a new house. So that means that this doesn't just apply to people putting up apartment buildings and stuff like this. It's for people just building a house. What happens if okay, let's say we go 150 meters. What happens, it has to go 150 meters from the barn. What if, once it goes 150 meters from the barn, and then they don't have enough left on their property to build? What happens? They don't get a permit. Okay, that's why I'm not leaning to 150. Because when it comes to residential, institutional land and stuff like that, fine. But when it comes to someone trying to build a house, I mean, that piece of land, they might have not bought. They might have just inherited it or something. And here we are telling them that they can't build a house on it because they're not 150 meters away from the next barn. No. 50 meters I can live with, no setback I can live with, but we do have to protect agricultural land. And I understand that because we have a lot of it to the north. But 150, to make someone, no, it would have to be 50 or none. Thank you.
Do you mind if I just make a point on that?
Please.
Is that okay? It could also include an option around a site plan approval process. So if, say, you had the regulation for a requirement of 150 meters for a new residential dwelling or house from a barn, and they couldn't meet that distance, it could still work. You could still develop on that property. And it's all based on how the regulation is written. But it could state that with the submission of a site plan showing that the maximum separation or setback distance is achieved on the lot, then it could still be approved. So there is sort of that flexibility, and not to bring up draft one, but that flexibility was written into those regulations as well. So we could carry that approach forward if that is something that everybody agrees on. But I just wanted to make that clarification.
So if someone wants to build a house and it's next to a farm with a barn, and so they have to do a site plan and everything even before they even apply for the building permit? Is that what you're saying?
It would be involved in the process of applying for the building permit.
And it would be an extra cost on these building permits or development?
I don't believe so,
Permits?
no.
Is there a charge for development permits? Yes, yes.
Yeah, so
Yes.
it would depend on what the contents of the site plan approval involve, right? So if it involves more detailed information, then they would just need to build a house, then there could be a cost associated with it. And it's also the decision of the development officer to grant site plan approval is appealable to council.
Respond, Norma. Okay, thank you.
Do you think you have enough to work with?
Yeah, we do certainly. I think the important piece is like whether there's a setback or not. And so whatever that number is at the end of the day, that's a very simple change that we can adjust at a later time. But having the regulation in place, that's where all the work is, and what that number is at the end of the day isn't a huge difference for us. So we'll work with a number, and we'll put the rest of it in place so that it will work with whatever that number is at the end of the day.
Okay. Let's move on then.
Alrighty, so on to agricultural land protection. So as the protection of agricultural land is a statement of provincial interest, it will need to be addressed in the planning document somehow. According to the Municipal Government Act, it states that the following must be considered. So giving priority to agricultural uses, limiting the number of lots, establishing separation distances for new non-agricultural development, so what we just talked about, and limiting topsoil removal. So in MODL specifically, the highest quality agricultural soils are class 3, which covers 15.3% of all land. And the area of land use for crops has declined by 22.3% between 2011 and 2021. There has been a greater proportion of development occurring on class 3 soils since 2004. So as mentioned, the protection of agricultural land will need to be addressed in the planning documents. When we engaged with public, we heard a strong sense of support for the protection of agricultural land. However, we also heard hesitation around overregulation and the need to maintain flexibility for farmers. An agricultural zone can help protect farmland by clearly identifying agricultural areas, and limiting subdivision within that zone can help direct development away from agricultural areas by allowing for fewer lots to be created. So here are some options related to the protection of agricultural land. So option number 1 would be to create an agricultural zone that requires a larger minimum lot size for new residential lots. So this would help to discourage residential development on agricultural lands by requiring larger lot sizes, but wouldn't limit how many lots can be created. Option 2 is to create an agricultural zone that limits the subdivision of land to 4 lots per year for a maximum of 12 lots total, and restricts private roads and flag lot developments. This option would provide a higher level of protection over agricultural lands than option 1 by limiting subdivision, which can help direct future growth away from agricultural areas and reduce land use conflicts. This option could also include policies that allow farmers to add additional lands to the zone if they choose. So we heard a bit about this through engagement, that some farmers were disappointed to find out that their lands were not included in the proposed agricultural zone. And then option 3 would be to create an agricultural zone that limits the subdivision of land to 2 lots per year, so half of option 2 for a max of 6 lots total, and it also restricts private roads and flag lot developments. So this option provides the highest level of protection over agricultural lands by allowing for the subdivision of only 2 lots per calendar year. Like option 2, this could include policies that allow farmers to add lands to the zone based on the feedback that we heard. But basically the goal of option 2 and 3 is to direct new residential development to already built up areas and to reduce the fragmentation of high quality agricultural soils. Option 2 is more flexible than option 3, but protects agricultural lands to a lesser extent. So staff recommend option 3 of creating an agricultural zone that limits subdivision to 2 lots per year and prohibits the creation of new private roads and flag lot developments. Staff recommend incorporating the suggestions from the public and stakeholders by allowing farms to be added to the zone on a case-by-case basis, even if their farms or land does not meet the threshold of the zone. Staff also recommend including lands as small as 3 hectares, so 7.4 acres in size, to be included in the zone. And staff believe that this approach would be consistent with the statement of provincial interest.
Councillor Moore.
So is this the one where that we might be telling people whether they can sell their farm or not? This is the one? Yes. Okay. And so which option here is the least stringent? 1 or 3? Because I'm
1.
confused. I think this whole agricultural thing could have been summed up in just one standard thing instead of splitting it all up. But anyway, so which one is the least restricted?
Option 1.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep, Tom.
So I think it's just on that comment. We can have farm-like operations and put setbacks in without zoning them agricultural, right? So it's not as simple or straightforward as one might think. So if you zone something agricultural, you're protecting it for agricultural use, but you're putting a really high threshold on the ability to rezone it for any other use. But you could have a farm-like operation and not be on Class 2 or Class 3 soil, never be zoned agricultural, but still want setbacks on the property, so you're pushing residential development farther away from your farm-like operation. So that's why it's separated to a certain extent. If you have Class 1 or Class 2 soils, those are even an elevated, higher level of protection. So I think ours is Class 3. The majority is Class 3.
And I think it would be helpful just to clarify, so the zone that was brought forward in draft number 1 and what's being discussed here is not a zone that would limit uses in any way different from just a normal rural zone. So this is not suggesting that a rural agricultural zone would have any different types of uses in it. It only basically shows the area that has higher quality soils, and it has limitations on the number of lots that could be created. So it's limiting development through looking at the subdivision process, but not limiting development to the extent that you only allow agricultural uses to occur. So the thinking with any of these options is that if you were in a rural agricultural zone, you could have an industrial operation or commercial, whatnot, the same as you could in a regular rural zone. But it's when you look to do a bunch of subdivisions or residential type of subdivision that you'd run into the restrictions between the zones. Just wanted to clarify that difference.
Deputy Mayor Vino.
I have a question for clarification and then a question. The 4 lots per year, max of 12, because they're lots, we're not dealing with a cluster development situation, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then with that, what is the reasoning to restrict development to 4 lots for a developer per year if in the end they can have 12? I'm thinking from the developer's perspective of having to do 4 a year and the expenses that go with that. What is the rationale to keep it at 4 for a year? Do we know what that would be?
It's mainly it's just an additional burden. So it's not impossible to do the 12, but it's more economical for them if they're looking at hiring surveyors and selling lots and planning out the whole development to plan it out at once. This kind of forces people to do it more slowly, and it's trying to gear it not towards developers, but towards families that may own a property and they'd like to subdivide off a few lots. It's trying to gear it towards that type of situation rather than somebody who's developing it for a residential development, but giving the flexibility to those people who might have a family member or whatever reason they might want to subdivide a few lots to make sure that they can still do some of that, but not say, we want to say you could do 12 lots, at a time.
Councillor Hubley.
Thank you. My concern is coming with resale, because we know that our children don't like to follow in our footsteps, and because I'm a farmer doesn't mean my daughter wants to be a farmer. And no, I'm not. And yeah, so we're basically going to tell them that they can't sell their property to who they want to because it falls under these restrictions. Is that right?
There's no limit here about who you sell it to.
The use of the
The
land.
use of the land in order to subdivide it would be. So, you know, if somebody said, I want to buy this farm property and use it for light industrial, that there wouldn't be any limit on that. But if they said, I want to buy that farm property and I want to subdivide it into 20 new lots, they couldn't do that in this scenario. Or at least in option 2 or 3. So anyone could buy and sell a property. Other municipalities have run into resistance from within the agricultural community because some of those farmers, I'm talking about East Hants in particular, there was some pushback from the farming community there because some of the farmers said, I want to be able to subdivide it and for residential development because that's partly what I'm planning on for my retirement. I need to be able to, so people had concerns about that piece, but in either situation, there's no limit to who can sell it. It's more about what they could do with their property and how they could subdivide it.
So that is my concern, because you're not going to be able to sell it to the highest bidder, obviously. And I know in your presentation here, you said that crops decreased by 22%, and I kind of have to question that that's because of the lack of land use planning. I think it's a lot of factors into that 22%. Yeah, I need a lot more information. I really don't know where I stand.
You need to tell us what information you need.
I'm going to listen to what everyone has to say, and hopefully I'll
Okay.
have a clearer mind.
Okay. Counselor Moore and then Counselor Smith.
My option is 1. I think that we're going to be painted all with the same broad brush anyway, that even though we're trying to put the minimum in that we can, we are still going to get kicked in the head when the public gets to have their say. And I think that what the overall thing is, like, all of a sudden we're putting all these restrictions on them. I think if we go easy with minimal, and right now, for farms in the outer areas, outside of, say, the town of Lunenburg, town of Bridgewater, and town of Mahone Bay, I'm just going to use Exit 12 as an example. The farms north to us and south to us. Right now, the potential of someone buying a farm and putting up a apartment building is very rare. Very rare for now. Eventually, yes, it's probably going to happen because we're going to run out of space for apartment buildings and residential buildings like in the core areas of outside the urban. So right now, I think option 1 will save us a lot of hassle. This is a living document down the road when people see that, you know, some of these farms may not be farmed down the road. Like Pam said, children may not want to do it. It gives them the option to look at this document and it can be revised, saying, okay, if this farm is sold, you know, it cannot only be subdivided 4 times or whatever. But for right now, I think that option 1 is our only option for the state that we're going to be, for the feedback that we're going to get from people. Just my thought.
Counselor Smith and then Counselor Bell.
I did hear quite a bit about the need to protect agricultural land, and, you know, as much as I feel like there'll be some criticism, I look at that loss of land over the last, the development on the only prime soil that we have. And I think, you know, it's our responsibility to take an approach that protects agricultural lands. And I did hear from one community that has a fair bit of that zone. in draft one. I don't know if we're not supposed to mention draft one anymore, but it was class 3 soil. And they want to protect the area from becoming too built up. They want some flexibility. So I feel like being able to subdivide the land 2 lots per year, max 6 total, would work for most of those property owners. So I feel comfortable going with option 3 and being able to say, we are taking measures to stop the fragmentation of agricultural land. And, you know, I'm willing to defend that because we've lost so much. I do have a question about the policies allowing farmers to add lands to the zone. Could they also take them off if they're not on class 3 soil? You know what I mean? Like if somebody puts it on the list and then somebody buys the land and says, well, actually, I don't want to grow blueberries anymore, can they change their mind and alter
That
the
would
zone?
not be the intent. The intent, it would be to just make that zone ideally larger to cover more area and not to decrease it. So I don't think, unless it was intentionally written that way to give people the option to also remove their land, it wouldn't, it shouldn't anyways, but it would work to add more land, not take it away, basically.
Councillor Bell and then Burns.
Thank you. I'm leaning towards option 2. The reason being is that maybe the farmlands are not threatened right at this time, but in some areas of the province they are. If you go to Kings County, they had quite a discussion and a fight about this. If you look at the Greater Toronto area, you see Premier Ford was just about thrown out of the office of Premier because he decided to sell farmland to developers. And people there where there's less farmland, well, actually it's not less farmland, but it's a greater need for building than it is here. People were very defensive of allowing farmland to go because you can't usually return it back to a farming state. You can go the other way, but you can't, there's not a reverse mechanism that's very good. Option 3 might be a bit hard to defend, but option 1 makes it seem like we really don't care, and we really should care. It should be part of the overall greening that we have as our concept of looking through a lens. So I can't go below option 2, and I'm hesitant to go to option 3. So two is comfortable for me, but if it needs to break a tie, I'll go with 3.
Okay, Councillor Burns and then Brooks.
Thank you. I kind of back away from these options and think my issues arise from like a higher level on this. It's more, I know what we're trying to do is protect the soils that are classified as class 3, but I'm also looking at current uses of land and how people are thinking about them being agricultural lands and what they're trying to protect. And it might not be for, you know, higher intensity agriculture growing things. It might just be the hayfields and protecting those. And I'm also thinking about the sizes of the units, and there's no perfect way to do this, but we're classifying PIDs as having a certain amount, parcels as having a certain amount of class 3 soil based on what's there, but that's a function of what soil is there and what is the current configuration of that parcel. I can think in West Northfield, anyone who drives by my house, that long skinny woodlot behind my house, that would be protected agricultural land. I'm personally okay with that, but that's protected agricultural land that will continue to be a forest until the end of time, as will all the other skinny lots around it. But they all abut on an old farm property that will not be considered protected agricultural land under this because it does not meet the threshold. And if you cross the other side of Smith Road, there's a piece of land for sale for a developer, and I know that residents are concerned because communally they've been haying that field for quite some time. The farmland on that parcel, which I suspect is Class 3, will not be protected because that's a 170-acre parcel and only 30 acres of it are going to be Class 3 soils. So I know that there isn't a perfect way to do this. I'm just looking at the map of where this is going to protect. Upper Northfield, most of it is going to be under this. As I go through West Northfield, it's the woodlots behind my house. Then you get down into Pine Grove Pit, expanded area, all protected, but also currently largely woodlot. There's some other areas of the municipality where this will go in clusters. So I guess my thought here is, aside from just arguing between option 1, 2, and 3, I would just encourage folks to sort of look at your areas, think about what it is your residents have said to you about what kind of lands it is to protect it. And I know I'm throwing a wrench in this, and so I am genuinely sorry about that. I know you're looking for direction from me, and I'm sorry. But it's not without purpose. It's to say, if we're looking to protect the lands that people are expecting us to protect as agricultural lands, is this the way we're doing it, as well as protecting the soils that can potentially be agricultural lands as well? And to look at this map, look at your communities, know what's there, and say, is this accomplishing that goal? I think there's very few of us around the table that would not say we want to make sure that the lands that make the nature and character of our communities, that we want to protect them, right? None of us want to see just like wide-scale development blown out the doors and change the nature of the community. It's just, are we accomplishing that with this? And I'm sorry to pick on your district, but when you get north of Upper Northfield up there, there's very little land that's going to be captured by this policy for Class 3 soils. And I suspect that there is more Class 3 soil up there than what this map would show. But that's also an area, like, it's called Farmington for a reason. People are thinking about areas that they want protected. So are we accomplishing that goal with this mechanism before we just say, oh, we're comfortable with the middle road on this mechanism, I guess is my point.
Councillor Brooks.
This is such a tricky one. I really concur with Councillor Moore that I don't want to be the body that strong arms people into what they can do with their land. Yet we're a province where 60% of our food comes in. And this is one of those questions where we sit around this council as modal, but we're also Nova Scotians. And the food that we grow here does not all stay here, and we know that. And so it's a higher level question about the future. I still would like to see some sort of, land registry where we're more of a supportive and facilitating to try to see if at the end of someone's farming life, if they want to sell that, or if they want to, that goes into other farmlands. How do we help facilitate keeping that there? I think if we strong arm people, there's going to be lots of pushback. If we do nothing, there's going to be lots of pushback. I don't want to have even more of our food brought into Nova Scotia. The day the Tantramar Marsh washes out, that'll be interesting. So, I'm trying to think about the future. I'm trying to think about our constituents, but this is a bigger existential issue to me for the entire province, So I know that sounded like a lot of rambling. I've got questions. I still don't exactly know. I know we have to work to protect some of what we cannot recoup. Once it's gone, it's gone. Won't come back.
If I may, and I know we talked through some other things with previous points here, but if council wants to take an idea and adjust it, we can speak to some of that, how doable that is within the time frame we've got. I know, Councillor Burns, you illustrated some of the shortcomings of the formula that we used. There are ways that we can adjust that formula if council wants to see an adjustment to how that's done. As an example, the way that we established that zone in the first draft was to take the map of Class 3 soils, but then only look at parcels that were 10 acres in size and at least 60% Class 3 soils, and limit it to those. So the thinking there is some of that class 3 stuff, you're going to be capturing tiny little already developed residential lots, and that's not the intention of this. So we put in the threshold of the 10 acres. We heard feedback from farmers that said, you know what, a lot of the lots I farm now are smaller. So that's the thinking behind reducing that threshold to 7.5, or if council wants to go smaller than that, that's fine. It's a small adjustment to do at the back end. So when we do that mapping, we kind of put those numbers in, and then we can see what that zone would look like. It's an easy change to make. The other piece I would mention is that 60% threshold. I think that was probably excluding some of those properties you were talking about. We can also establish, if that was a concern, we can, for example, come up with a threshold that would make sure that those lots are included if they include a certain amount of acreage. So if you had 100 acres, 30% of it is the amount that was class 3, but that whole parcel should be included in there. We can come up with another threshold to make sure that gets included by saying, if they've got more than 10 acres of class 3, then that lot does fall into that zone. So we can play with some of that very easily. If some of that would help to better align this with what council wants to do, those are easy changes that we can make, based on the feedback today.
Anyone else? It'll be no surprise that I'm opting for option 3, but I'll come back. Councillor Reinhardt.
Yeah, I appreciate the discussion about this, because I know that it's hard to put restrictions like this in place. But I do think about, the small amount of agricultural land that we have, and it's a finite resource, and once it's gone, it's really gone, and we've already lost so much of it. So I think there's talking about working with the details, maybe finessing a little, what is, determined to be, in this category and what's not, and thinking about how to, help people who this is going to affect, are things that can be worked out later. But if we don't protect the land and we lose it, then we can't do anything about it. So all that's to say that I would be leaning more towards option 3.
And I'll speak to option 3 and it'll be probably no surprise. I think the concerns around the pushback we'll get from people is true. We will get pushback from some people, but if we believe that agricultural land needs to be protected, that should outweigh the concern we have about putting restrictions in place. I sit on a farm that has 4 generations invested in it, and it took 4 generations to get that to be arable land in this community. The tile drains that are there were put in probably close to 100 years ago. The old tile drains, not the newer ones. They're still there. Because our land is poor, it's not poor, but it needs work, it needs investment, it needs that tile drainage, it needs manure, it needs lime, it needs fertilizer, it needs tillage, it needs all of those things. And so lands that have been identified here were used in our past to produce food. And if we don't protect that in some way, it will grow up in alder bushes, and we aren't going to have apartment built in Upper Northfield or West Northfield or Parkdale Maplewood. The apartments are going to be here. We're going to have single-family units built on open fields if we don't protect it, because it's cheaper to do that for those that are building. So, yes, am I prepared to defend this? Yes, because if it's gone, we won't get it back, and we can say we'll fix it down the road. But that's why we are where we are today, is because previous councils said, we'll let the next council do this. It's time that we do this, and we get it done, and we start the process of how we're going to protect that farmland. And I think what we're doing here, based on the conversations we've had, we know the sensitive places that both Councillor Moore and Councillor Hubley have outlined. We know that there will be some resistance. But sometimes you have to take hard decisions and say what's going to be good in the next 50, 25, 50, 75 years, 100 years, when I hope there's 8 generations of people that are going to be on that farm in Wildville because it was protected. And I think we've left enough provision in this to allow those farmers who, or landowners who need to sell a piece of land to help for their retirement, because we know that's what happens, because they haven't made enough from their farm over their lifetime to support them during their retirement. This allows for that. So I think in that respect it's fair. What we need to think about is that land that may disappear and never ever come back to an opportunity to farm. Councillor Moore.
I just want to make it clear for the record that I am not anti-protecting farmland. Of course I am. My biggest fear is what we put in place will hinder people to be able to sell the land to anybody. Yes, I know Tom said you can sell it to anybody, but it's the person that buying it, what they can do with it. So I am not against saving saving farmland and stuff like that. But it's just, you know, are we going in with an iron hammer right now?
So you like option 2?
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I just want to say I really like the option of looking at tweaking the formula so that more lands are included, possibly. I was talking to a young farmer last night who has a real hard time finding land and was kind of bemoaning the loss of some properties locally, and yeah, taking a look at that formula. I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, I think that that's important because we just don't have the big expanses of land that Kings County has, and it is getting more and more difficult to put those lots together to get enough land for crop production, or mostly for hay, and that is a real issue. So I think we need to look at that. I don't know that we've got, yeah, Councillor Moore.
Just one more quickie. In the first draft, was there a map of where the Class 3 soil and all that was? Because was there one in, is there going to be a map in front of us next time we meet that we can see where the Class 3 soils are in Lunenburg County?
Yeah, so what was done was take the Class 3 soils. There is a map that exists. So the federal government's had a map for many years of that. And we took that and then put in a formula to reduce it down depending on some of those pieces, right?
So we'll be able to see that map, because I didn't open document 1 ever since it hit the news. It's like, go away. So anyway, but there will be a map when we sit down next week.
We can share it. It exists now, so it's not going to take any work for us, but we can absolutely have that.
I'd like to see that again. Thank you.
Councillor Brooks.
I'm going to ask a dumb question here. The province states that this is a priority of theirs. Have we, or has anyone had dialogue with them to say how much of a priority in terms of, are you looking at putting some money into the protection of these lands to help people who are going to transition off their land yet preserve the land? Is this a conversation we're having anywhere in the province? The province, easy enough to say, well, it's a priority of ours. Okay, but these are dollars and cents of men and women who may have been on the farm for 100 or 200 years. Maybe they're staying, maybe they're not. We're trying to save the land. You say that you're interested in that, but this is going to come down to dollars and cents in some of these issues. Is this a conversation I'm asking, not facetiously, I just don't know. Is anyone having this conversation with the province?
There's been discussions, I think, with Federation of Agriculture, which would be the farm organization, around land trusts, and I think, in fact, farmland trust does exist in Kings in the Valley. So there's been work, but that's being funded not by the province. It's a private initiative. So I don't know of anything, and I don't know if you want to speak to it, anything that the province has actually looked at this, but there is that initiative around protecting land in the valley.
Yeah, I think that the province has to be satisfied that we've adequately addressed the issue of protection of agricultural land in our MPS and LUB, or it'll be rejected, like Pictou. So it's up to council to indicate where it wants to land on this issue, but that doesn't mean that the province necessarily has to accept that. So if you shoot too low, the province could reject our municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw and send it back to us for a redo. So you just have to have that in mind. So we can create flexibility, but if the formula we incorporate reduces the land to such an extent that it doesn't no longer accurately reflects the potential agricultural land in MODL, we could end up having to do this again. So it's important to put the right amount of thought into it. So the provincial statement of interest is to protect agricultural land. It isn't to protect the interests of the farmer on what they want to do next with the land, to subdivide it and sell it. Option 1 in the Valley has made a bloody mess. So they had a rule that would allow you to carve off a piece of property from your farm and create a 20-acre residential lot with one house on it. And so they have these mansions in farm country with, and they're massive, like they're 20-acre lots. So it may look good in thinking of, well, allows the farmer to subdivide off a big parcel, and that parcel can be residential. But in practice, it's not really effective. And so in the Annapolis Valley, where there's a lot of farmland, farmers have gone from food production to commercial agricultural production and sell land to the Ontario Teachers Union to grow hemp on the valley floor in the Annapolis Valley. And so it doesn't even support the idea of protecting our agricultural land for food security. It's a commercial crop because that's what Mr. Fulton thought was, he also created a golf course on farmland outside Berwick. But it's a really challenging issue, but what council has to focus on is where's the level of protection for agricultural land that you can support. And you're never the province isn't going to criticize you for going too far, but they can if you don't go far enough. So it's a challenging balancing act. And it's one of the few areas where the provincial statement of interest has been used by the province to send things back. And earlier there was mentioned, I think it was in 2011, a group of farmers in the valley with land next to Wolfville wanted to rezone it residential to allow for subdivision right next to Wolfville. And the minister said no. And Elderkin is still there, and there's residential development right up to his border. Right, so the province takes this one pretty seriously.
Okay, Councillor Reinhardt. Then we're going to try to kind of summarize or figure out where we're at here.
Mm-hmm. I think there's some connections that can be made between this and coastal protection. I know they're not exactly the same, but that was planning that we brought, well, not we, but this council brought in that affected certain property owners. But the consensus was that there, our coastline is a valuable resource that we have to protect. So I see some similarities there and thinking about it that way. So just one other aspect to think about.
I think it's a good analogy. Councillor Burns.
Sorry, I promise I'll be quick. The two quick points are just, I think for me, I know you're going to get summary and need some direction today, and I would just tell, like, council and those working on it, that my lack of buy-in on what we're talking about today really for me is just, I'm not conceptualizing yet what lands we're protecting. So I don't want you to think that I'm like, oh yeah, no regulation for no reason. I guess what I'm saying is, just when I look through the map of the lands that I know that like we're largely protecting class 3 soils and what will continue to be in our lifetime and my kids' lifetime and their kids' lifetime, forestry. So the soil isn't going away, but it's the nature of the land that we're protecting that really gets me. And my second point to the province there is, I've been in the room, well, people from the province have said, oh, no, this is just the municipality, you should go talk to them. So if they would like to reject a plan on agriculture that we think is okay, I'm sorry for everyone who will have to go through this a third time, but I'm not afraid of them having to own their decision to put restrictions on it rather than punt it to me and then continuously to send people to me to complain about it. Well, they get to talk about what they want in a different sphere. If the province would like to reject our plan because they think we haven't restricted land enough, then I'm completely okay with the province doing that. And then tell me exactly what it is you would like me to restrict as you do that.
Okay, just a general show of hands for option 1.
Can there be a 1.5?
You can, okay. Okay, option 2. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and option 3. Okay. Well, it's close between 2 and 3. I'm not sure from the discussion, did you get some fine tuning points?
Yeah, there's I think some changes that we can make with the formula itself. But I think similar to the last time, 2 and 3 are the same approach, in how many lots you allow to subdivide with. That's a minor detail that can be adjusted later as well.
Okay. Are council members reasonably satisfied we've had a thorough enough discussion about this?
Can I just ask one more question?
Of course you can.
Can I have an explanation on restricted private roads and flag lots? So are we saying that they have to be municipal roads? No.
No, it would just say no new private roads in those areas. And that the reason for that is to prevent bigger size developments.
How do you do a 12, 4 lots per year, maximum 12 total. How do you do a subdivision of 12 lots
Exactly, yep.
without a road?
Very difficult. There might, yes, so there might be a handful of lots out there that have tons of road frontage. And it's clear sight lines and it meets all the provincial requirements, maybe you could get that. But what this does is, a lot of lots that are long and deep couldn't do 12 lots because they couldn't put a private road in. Yeah.
So there again, down the road, we are tying the hands of developers. Okay.
Okay, anything else anyone wants to dig in on agricultural land? Because we're going to now move off the farm and on to home-based businesses. I think that's next. Okay, let's move on.
Okay. So council did have a pretty thorough discussion on this topic already, but just to kind of recap, in terms of minimum requirements, there's no provincial requirement here to regulate home-based businesses in particular. The minimum planning requirements do require that the planning documents consider different things like commercial uses and residential and industrial and how they interact with each other, but there's no prescribed minimums around this. We have lots of home-based businesses, of course, as you know very well. When we went out in the public engagement process, people were talking a lot about businesses and their homes and not wanting to see regulations that were too stringent. The usefulness of them really comes down to if you have areas that you're deciding to have more targeted residential areas, then this allows you to have flexibility to ensure people can have businesses in those areas. But if you took an approach that doesn't designate any areas as specifically residential, it doesn't really have a very much use. So it really kind of comes down to how you want to do some of the zoning. But in terms of how most places create regulations in their bylaws, a lot of times it's to limit really kind of obnoxious types of uses or uses that would cause a lot of conflict in those residential areas. And also they typically talk about square feet and limits, and that really is tying it to the building code regulations, typically that get into, you know, if you're a commercial use in your home, then you go above a certain threshold and you have to do things like accessibility and fire and things like that. So it's making sure that it's consistent with what the building code requires. So in terms of different policy directions, council may choose any of these. There's no minimum requirement. The kind of baseline in terms of minimum would be just not to have any regulations on home-based businesses at all. The one piece that I would make sure that you're very aware of is that if you decide to have a residential type of zone, this is important because it gives more flexibility rather than having regulations. So if you have a zone that's only residential use, you need to ensure that people can have home-based businesses in that zone. This is what that could do. So it kind of is part and parcel. You may want to say, if you didn't want to have regulations on home-based businesses, that's fine, but you need to consider that in the context of whether you want to have residential only type of areas. The next option there would be regulate them in those specific residential zones, but to a minimal extent. So it would only speak about certain things. So in those residential areas, only really getting into certain types of uses that you don't want to see in maximum floor area. That's kind of the minimal approach to, you know, restrictions on home-based businesses in those areas. It would kind of say you can do anything but these uses and up to this size. And the size thing is just about the building code regulations, really. The third option there, and this is kind of what we talked about with council previously in that previous draft, was a lot more kind of comprehensive piece there. So it would permit them where residential uses are allowed, and had a whole comprehensive list of things that talked about employees, road frontage on, you know, private versus public road signage, and it had a pretty extensive list of permitted uses. So the staff recommendation here, particularly based on the public feedback, is to go with option 2, which would pare back kind of what we had discussed previously to really only minimal amounts of discussion, but recognizing that you might want to have some of those areas showing kind of subdivisions and residential areas, and that if you do want to have those, it is important that you allow home-based businesses in those areas. So that's giving you the flexibility to those people. And so that's important that if you do want to go the direction of residential areas, that you make sure that you have flexibility clauses in the land use bylaw. I wouldn't view this as a restriction. I would view it as a flexibility piece. But it only really comes into play if you have something like a rural residential zone or a lakeshore zone or some kind of hamlet residential zone. Those are the types of zones that this could apply to, and that was the thinking in the earlier draft. And so with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, comments. It's a question for clarification. On option 2, where it defines, this option permit home-based businesses, a list of permitted uses. Is that list that we would have seen in draft 1? Or?
It would probably be a more extensive list. So the thinking here is it would be more permissive than what would be in draft 1.
Okay, Councillor Smith and then Moore.
is there an option to have a list of non-permitted uses instead of permitted uses? I'm just wondering if that might be simpler.
That is, yep, that's an approach, yep. So that is possible to do that.
It feels to me like I don't have time to look it up, but like municipality of Chester or the municipality of Queens, did they take that approach of listing which uses were not permitted? Because it seems to me like industrial, uses in a residential neighborhood might be what we want to flag, but leave the rest
Yeah.
pretty much open.
Yep, yeah, it's not, we have some secondary planning areas that have a mix of both. And so that would probably be a better fit for this, for if you wanted to go with the option 2 would be, you just list what you don't want to see there, and then don't get into trying to define everything you do want to allow. Yep.
Yeah, and just for clarity, I would support option 2 with that change.
Okay, Councillor Moore.
Yes, I'd like to see that list of what is permitted, what isn't permitted. In option 2, if I had a home and a garage that I used for storing my car and truck, whatever, but down the road I wanted to change that garage into an industrial garage where I brought cars in to do body work, because I'm so good at that, to do body work and all that kind of stuff. Would option 2 allow me to do that?
It depends on the details, like you said, if you wanted to see, I think garages, body shops are typically the types of uses that people would not want to permit in that type of community, because this would only apply to certain areas. But there's absolutely there's no specific rule about you have to allow it or not.
Okay, and also the ones that are already in business, these home garages that are doing body work and repairs and all that, these are all grandfathered in, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bell, and then Deputy Mayor Vino.
I sort of do like the list of listing what is not in rather than restrict, especially what's already there. The two concerns I have, first one is someone locating a home-based business that is within a private road structure where they may pay 1/10 of the road cost per year, but have 50% of the traffic come to their house because of their business. To me, that doesn't seem totally right. The second thing is, and I've seen this before in Kings County, where they operate a business that produces a very terrible smell, like boiling chicken bodies to make fertilizer. And when they locate into an area where there's some other homes, I don't know how those people live there. But there have been examples of that. That's one of the businesses I would not like locating next to me, and I don't think anybody else would. So smell and road use are two things that I have some concerns about, but I don't want to necessarily tell you, the professional, how it could be regulated. I'd rather you tell me how it could be accommodated.
Deputy Mayor Vino.
Thank you. I hope the name is in itself, but a home-based business is a business in addition to where your primary residence is, correct? If somebody wanted to open up a business for entertainment purposes on the same property as their home, would that fall under this, or would that be a commercial type business? Like a wedding venue, for example?
So it comes down to, the maximum floor area comes into play there, and it depends on the zone. So if we kind of think about the rural, most of the municipality will end up in some sort of general rural zone. That zone would permit multiple kinds of uses on the same types of property. So that type of thing, most areas are going to fall into that category. And yes, you could have It could be industrial, it could be commercial, it could be institutional, it could be residential, all in the same property. What we're talking about here are pockets of more dense residential. If council wants to go the route of keep treating those areas differently, then you would say there are certain types of, say, prohibited uses, and there's going to be a maximum amount of floor space allowed to do that. A lot of municipalities will limit what you can have within your home, and then they'll also say, but if you have a garage or outbuilding or something, this is a limit that you could have there. But it's always going to be under that assumption that it's home-based and it's not a commercial entity unto itself and wouldn't require, you know, those fire and building code requirements that come into play when you have a much larger business.
So will any part of this process address the commercial side of it? I'm having trouble understanding that, and even if we put in zones, which tend to be in higher residential areas, which are around the outskirts of town generally, but you could have somebody north of the 103 have a beautiful property they want to turn into something else, and abutting neighbors that don't feel the same way. So what part of our MPS planning strategy looks at that? And you don't have to go into detail if it's not this, if we're coming to it, but that's where my mind's at when you bring this up.
This plan, so the agricultural pieces that we just talked about were one component of that, so looking at conflicts. The other piece would be when you're looking at, you know, really intensive industrial uses. That's where you want to see some type of separation between those uses. But when it comes to like the rural parts of the municipality and people operating different types of commercial businesses and residential, I think the thinking here is that it would be a lighter touch and there wouldn't be really kind of specifics on the rural areas and what people could do on those properties. And yeah, you're going to have some conflicts for sure that will continue. But I think particularly when we look at the feedback from the public in the rural communities, they don't want something that gets into that level of restriction. It's really kind of those pockets where it's more heavily just residential that there seem to be more appetite for something like this.
That answer it? For now? Okay. Councillor Moore.
What if that so-called, what if that so-called residential had the outside garage and turned it into commercial, and they sold it? Would the people buying it that wanted to run that commercial be allowed to? Yes. Okay. Now go back and, please, go back and explain to me the difference between, I know option one has no requirements at all. What is the requirements in option two? Because I'm scared I'm going to miss something in between there. So can you explain option two again, in my words?
Sure. So it might be helpful for me to say, you can put a kind of asterisk beside whatever option you want to choose, and then it be contingent on a discussion happening next week.
Okay.
When you can have some direction on, do you want to have a rural residential zone, for example?
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't, none of this really matters. Mm-hmm. So whatever option you're thinking about today, that helps inform whether we should have a rural residential zone. Do you want to have areas in the municipality that there's a density of residential, that there's a need to have some type of limits on commercial industrial? Mm-hmm. So that's probably the bigger question here in terms of how you carry that out. These are the ways that you could allow a certain level of commercial types of businesses to exist in residential areas. But if you have the view that I don't want to do any of this, option one does do that, but you'd also then need next week to say, I don't want to have this special residential zone mm-hmm. either, because that's partly why you would have a residential zone in place. Mm-hmm. So it's not, you can't have all of the decisions made today about mm-hmm. what that looks like. the big difference between the two, 1 and 2, is that 2 has something in the bylaw that speaks to home-based businesses. Option 1 would have nothing there. Option 2 would talk about those kind of more obnoxious types of uses that most people would say, I wouldn't ever want that next door to me. And then it would also have that maximum floor area piece as well, but it wouldn't have anything else.
Okay, but, so that list will be coming next week for,
We won't have a list for next week, but what we would do is, if there's a general kind of direction about saying, for example, we want a list of prohibited uses, rather than saying, give us a list of ones that are permitted,
Okay.
we can go with that.
okay,
And then if people are okay with just maximum floor area, we can go with that. If people want to say, no, we want to see something about private roads as well, we can add that into option 2.
okay.
That's the level of direction, I think, for today
Yeah.
that would be helpful.
I'm not quite sure on the maximum floor area. I'm not quite sure if I can support that. I mean, if we're going to allow someone to do something on their property under what we're going to allow for a business in this rural residential area that we might be saying is a rural residential area, I don't know if I could actually tell them, yes, you can have this for your business, but you can only have this much maximum floor space. So I'll have to just wait. Right now, I'm between 1 and 2. There should always be a 1.5. Right now, I'm between 1 and 2, but I will look at that list next week of businesses that are not prohibited. Unprohibited.
Right, so yeah, and we're not going to have that list by next
Right.
week. But,
Oh, unprohibited, not by next week?
no, yeah, so the next week stuff is already pretty much done, because
Okay.
in order to turn it around, we have to get it basically ready now.
Yeah.
But it's enough feedback. If you're looking for a list of prohibited uses as an example, we can do that, and then we can tweak it later, but the whole idea is that if that's what you want, and you want a list of prohibited uses, we can do that, and then we can iron out those details. It's about whether or not that's the approach you want to take.
Yeah.
Just on the maximum floor area, what that does give you is, you wouldn't have if you had a residential subdivision with some of these regulations in place and didn't really spell out the maximum size of that home-based business, what you might allow then is that somebody has a whole lot that's, most of it's just used for commercial rather than residential. It just provides some level of control over the scale of that commercial use, because you've already said this is a residential area rather than a commercial area. Whereas in the rural area, you're not going to worry about that. It's in that subdivision. Do you want to have people saying, I used to live in my house, but I've turned the whole thing into a hair salon, like the entire house. It's just a commercial enterprise. Do you want people doing that? Or do you want to say, look, it still needs to be a house to some degree, and what that degree is up for debate, but having a maximum floor area gives you the ability to have a primary use in that place. So Norma's just showing us, in terms of a definition, in the kind of draft document, it's about being accessory to a home on the property.
So a separate building?
No, just
No?
not the primary use. So there's always something primary.
Yeah. I'm just not sure if residents in the rural area are up for rural residential zoning. I'm just not quite sure if they are.
Right.
Maybe closer to the urbans. I know there's a couple of huge subdivisions going just up the road from here, and one of them happened to be in the bottom part of my district. Maybe those people do want this kind of stuff. I don't know, because there's no houses there yet for me to ask. But I know in the area of New Germany, I don't think this will sell. So I'll have to just wait and see my decision. But right now, I'm option 1. And it's not that I don't care, it's just the fact that it's too harsh of regulations for the rural areas. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments on home-based business? Counselor Smith.
Yeah, I just want to say that especially the lakeshore residential areas in my zone, I see a lot of use for some regulation of home-based businesses, but a light touch. And just to say, again, I support option 2. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that home-based businesses are really important. I think I see in this something to protect them and to protect residents at the same time.
Just to take a little temperature of the room, the number of people supporting option 2. 2, 3, put them up again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 and 4. Okay.
Wendy back next week? I'll be talking to her, yeah.
Do you have enough?
That's enough, and I think we heard as well that it would be preferable to have a list of prohibited
Yes,
uses, and so we'll
yes.
incorporate that as well. Yep.
Okay, let's, I feel like the energy is kind of going out of the room. I'm looking around at people and. But we are going to finish at 3:15. We won't get through everything, but I'd rather us have good, thorough discussion and not feel that we've rushed it. But we will finish at 3:15 wherever we are, okay? Councillor Burns.
Can I just make one point to what we were just talking about with the home-based businesses? I should have mentioned it. I think where you're seeing some unease with this is I think you're seeing even within some communities, people, I think what you're seeing is a struggle with whether they're consider themselves rural or rural residential, if you will, suburban versus rural.
Yeah.
When I talked to two folks in Pine Grove there, and I was just reading through all the restrictive covenants to give me an idea of what they've actually agreed to by purchasing their land, and it varies. And half the people, a third of the people are saying, well, we're rural, we're the rural part. And then another third is saying, well, we're a subdivision, buddy. Like we see ourselves as a subdivision out. So I think where you're seeing the tension here about the home-based businesses is people have sort of uniformly said, we don't like the things you see in restrictive covenants. We don't want a motor garage or a gas station. So where you're seeing me waffle between 1 and 2 is really about helping preserve the identity of the communities that people are in. And when we're talking, this speaks to the communities that may not be uniformly decided in the nature of that community that they live in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the issues around how we define the zones will very much shape this, so.
And are we going to be able to have different zones with different areas? Okay.
Okay, let's move on to a really good, lively discussion on RVs.
Okay, I would say this is not covering as much ground, this topic, as other topics, like the documents. This is actually a very kind of almost niche piece of the work. But it's important because it came up a lot as part of the engagement, and there was a specific mention of this issue. So the question here is about how to regulate, or if to regulate, recreational vehicles. It is fairly hot topic in other municipalities. There's no provincial requirement here. There's no minimum requirement. There is a statement of interest about housing. Now that doesn't probably necessarily apply to regulating RVs, but the housing piece is really about making sure that you're not being overly restrictive in preventing certain types of housing. So that's, I think, where this comes in, because the discussion about RVs, mostly a lot of that focused on people's need to live in them. And so this is really about, whether to not to permit that or control that or have any regulations about whether people can live in them year round. So when we did some of the engagement, some of the people were frustrated with kind of what they perceived maybe to be limiting the ability of people to be living in recreational vehicles. When we talked to a lot of people about that and discussed what kind of had been presented in draft 1, a lot of people, once they understood what was there, didn't share that view anymore. There was a lot of people who talked about the need for diverse housing, that more need for affordability. Some people had some concerns about how RVs that people are living in year-round, how they're being serviced. So some of the different ways that council can regulate RVs involve a requirement for a development permit after a set period of time. and regulating in them in terms of whether or not people can live in them, and applying certain setbacks and things like that as well. So this is really just getting direction to confirm where council might want to go with the piece around whether people can live in them. So option one is basically just to not regulate that any differently from anything else. You could have an RV on any lot for any given amount of time, with no level of municipal oversight. That there, in terms of what we heard from the public, there was a desire to have something around that, so that that's kind of a bit of a drawback from that option. The second option here would be to have some regulation to say you can have a certain amount on a property year-round, but not have any kind of special requirements other than just getting that permit and having it comply with any other setbacks that would exist. That would basically create, by creating a limit to the number you can have on a lot, that also then gives you a better ability to say what a campground is and isn't. So for example, like the next topic is saying talking about RV parks or campgrounds. And by saying you can have up to a certain number of RVs on a lot, gives you the ability to say, you can do this and you're not a campground, but if you have 10 RVs on a lot, then you're actually a campground and there's different rules. The second option doesn't have any oversight on whether people have an approved septic system. Option three, really, the only difference there is the approved septic system piece. So the province, Department of Environment, they regulate septic systems. They don't allow people, like their regulations don't allow people to dump gray water and black water, in like unapproved places. But that's, when you talk about servicing, the concerns that people have typically revolve around making sure that that is not an issue. And so option three is the staff recommendation here. And it would be similar to option two, but there would be a piece there that's saying they need to have an approved septic system if they're going to live in it year round. And an approved septic system just means whatever the Department of Environment is okay with. One of those options includes a pit privy. So some people identify cost and complexity and things like that being an issue with anyone in this situation. The fact that a pit privy is an option for people that meets the Department of Environment's regulations is certainly like a less expensive option for people that are concerned about cost. So that kind of is a bit of a summary of the three options.
Okay, hands are up. Councillor Bell, Deputy Mayor Vino, Councillor Moore.
This day and age, when we find that there are people that have housing, the inability to provide themselves with housing, they're finding that RVs might be the way out. Based on that, I don't necessarily like to put too many restrictions on them. And if an individual who owns property can make it available to their friends or family to come, and I do have situations like that in my district, I can accept that. And if the neighbor is upset by it, I have in the past went and said, if you were in this circumstance, acted as the referee, and by the time I left, they accepted it, or at least they told me they did. The only issue I do have is the release of raw sewage, especially when they're close to a neighboring property that was there first, or to a brook or something. So I do think that if someone wants to invite people in on their property, if there's opportunity to put a T or a Y on an existing septic system that can handle the extra loads, it's really like an extra bedroom in the house. It should be permitted. But to allow an RV there for a longer period than 6 months with no sewage, I can't really fight that battle. I don't think I'd like it next to me, and I can't build a camp without putting a proper outhouse. If I can't afford a septic tank or a septic field, I should be able to afford an outhouse beside it. It may only be temporary, it might be for a year, but in some cases, and I know of some in my district, they've been there for 2 years or more. They don't look bad, terrible, but I suspect I never ever saw any digging up around them to locate a septic bed, but I look the other way because I could be in such a situation. But from a health point of view, I need to voice that factor.
Deputy Mayor Vino.
Thank you. I have many, I won't say many, I can think of a dozen properties in my district where people are living in RVs. Sometimes it's the only thing on the lot, and other times it's in their parents' backyard and they're in an RV. So I have two questions. Those who camp in the summertime, who live in an RV in the summertime, they get it pumped at the end of the summer. If there's people living in RVs that are doing that, that doesn't involve Department of Environment, they're just having somebody come and pump it. If we're putting a restriction on it that they have to have a septic system, we're saying that they can't just pump it when it gets full. Is that correct? If they want to live in it for more than 30 days?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, it would kick in after if it was, lived in for more than 30 days at a time. Yeah.
Okay. And my second question is in option 2, what the residential setback is. Only focused on whether the recreational vehicle meets residential setbacks. What are those setbacks?
So one of those pieces we'll probably get to next week, I don't think we'll get to it today, would be water setbacks. Now, if council wishes to go that route of some type of water course setback, they would just to apply the same to this. So it would be just to whatever, building setbacks might be in existence, yet to be determined, would apply to an RV as well.
Can I ask one final question? And for those that live in an RV just for the summer months, July and August, that is over the 30 days, and they don't have any desire to put in septic because they get it pumped at the end of the season. How does that fit into this component? Because I do have a lot of people that do that as well. They live in their RV for the summer and then move back to their main home. I can't see them wanting to put a septic system in because they get it pumped, they winterize it, and close it up for the year. So it's a gap in this.
Yeah, and I guess, one of the adjustments that you could make if council wanted to like the look of this but was concerned about that, you could make that day we could adjust it so that there's a longer time frame before that would kick in. But I'm similar to, I think, what Councilor Bell discussed. People that may live year-round do have the ability to get their tanks pumped as well. So it's not to say that people couldn't or aren't doing that, but it's to identify that sometimes is an issue, and because of that issue, it's better off to have a more long-term solution with some type of approved system or outhouse or whatnot. So yeah, you could tweak what's here to maybe find some middle ground there. If that was the bigger concern, was just those seasonal ones that, they're getting the tanks pumped regularly. There's not an issue or concern around that. If that would kind of better fit what you want to do.
Just the 30 days is throwing me off because I know there are people that go July and August and live in an RV for the summer. Maybe some of June, maybe some of September to tie in the holiday, and that 30 days would put them in a whole other category.
I think Deputy Mayor raises a point that I had noted as well, that I think I'm not opposed to having the date, but I think we have to look at how people are using RVs. There's one thing to use it for a summer recreational location as opposed to living in it as a permanent housing option. So I think the number of days is important, whether it's 60 might be more reasonable, 75, I don't know, but
Yep.
something more
Yeah.
than 30. I think 30 is quite limiting, even for someone who might be opting to see if that's a reasonable option for them permanently as well. Sometimes people that end up in that situation in 30 days wouldn't know whether that's what they have to do. And I think 30 days is a little bit limiting. We'll go to Councillor Moore and then to Councillor Smith.
Well, again, I am between 1 and 2, and I have a lot of people in my district that live in trailers year-round. And it's only because that's all they can afford. What they're doing with the sewage is, I'm pretty sure that they're having it pumped, or they're taking it to a pumping station, because most campgrounds, when they're open, you can take the little thing on wheels and pump it in their pumping stations. They would have to take that to a certified pumping station. Telling them that they have to have, what would be the recreational vehicle meets, for number 2, meets residential setbacks? That would be so many feet or meters from a waterway and all that kind of stuff. Is that what you're saying for number 2?
Yeah, and that's only if council decided to have those setbacks.
Right.
So it'd be just to apply the same rules that apply to a house to the RV.
Right.
Yep.
So most people, if they really, I don't know if they would have to, if they have 3 recreation vehicles on one site for year-round. I'm struggling with this one. People that are living in trailers year-round now that that only do pumping of their holding tanks, are they grandfathered?
Yes.
Okay. And so I'm in between 1 and 2. Maybe they do need to require a development permit that if they're going to stay there long-term. But as for the hardship of putting in a privy is can be just an outside outhouse?
Yes, that's right. So it would be just saying that they need to have some proof of the Department of Environment has okayed whatever septic system they have. One of the types of septic system that meets environment's rules is a pit privy or an outhouse. So that's an approved system from environment's perspective.
I grew up with the pit privy, so until I was 14 years old, so I know what they are, but I know they're probably designed better now than mine was at home, so, yeah. Okay, I'm in between 1 and 2.
Councillor Smith is next, and then Hoopley.
So if a tiny home was on wheels, would the same policy apply?
Yeah, we have another one coming back about tiny homes.
Oh, okay.
I think that's going to be our 3rd workshop, and we can clarify that. But yeah,
Okay.
we'll get to that one.
Okay. I think my view on this is due to the housing crisis, I would want to see minimal regulations around this. I think setbacks are reasonable as environmental protection. I think number per lot is also a very reasonable regulation. But if people are willing to get their RVs pumped out regularly and they're not dumping it somewhere, then it seems to me that that's the choices that they're making. It's not an easy life, but that's the way they're making do right now. And I feel like if the province isn't going to step in and say you have to regulate the septic of RVs in this way, I'm kind of hesitant to do that. Also because I think we catch up in it people who may, summer in their RVs for like 3 months of the year. I have residents who do that. They summer for 3 months and then they move somewhere else, and they pump out their RV and they're responsible about it. Yeah, I really am on the side of not regulating the septic if we don't have to. But also recognizing that there should be something in place if someone is dumping, is just dumping and not disposing of their gray water or sewage properly.
Councillor Hubley and then Burns.
I don't even know where to begin. So I don't want to say that they have to have an approved septic system, but we have to have something in place. There was a situation here a few years ago that someone's RV sewage was seeping into the neighbor's yard. And I really think that it is our responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen with a regulation, whatever that may be. And I would like to see the 30 days increased to at least 90.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you. My comments really come from my district, but my district doesn't have a ton of recreational RV use in the way that some of your districts have. So my comments are not to predicate issues that are arising in there. It's just I can speak from what I see, and that's the reality of our geographically based system. Honestly, I at this point I don't favor regulating them because I haven't been exposed here to the issues in which the municipality could have stepped in my district and solved it. Every time I've seen it come up was in an area that was developed with restrictive covenants where people are getting together, and it really is someone trying to develop a lot cheaper than what they otherwise are supposed to in the scheme of the development, and the development stops them from doing so. I also think that right now housing is an issue for people, and people are slipping into options that I don't want to make it more difficult for them who, if that's the option they're going to. There is the units that you would deem deeply affordable for folks who need this are not they're not widely available in most of our communities. So I'm hesitant to step in there. This is going to sound terrible, but I suspect that a lot of the issues that arise that people see when they say they want regulations with RVs are not related to the recreational vehicle itself, but other activities or other things that come along on the property. And so I'm just nervous about a regulatory tool targeted at RVs when really we are looking at symptoms of other issues or other mechanisms we may need to step in. We're going to have a shiny new nuisance bylaw at some point that will be approved. There will be some things that will be caught in that. There are other things that are larger social issues that are beyond my ability to solve right here. So for me, I just don't see stepping into the conversation, or stepping into it with regulation. And I definitely take what we heard report as there are some issues that probably come alongside those RVs that we would look at how those would be better resolved.
I covered the entire district of Lunenburg campaigning, and I was shocked by the number of people living in RVs. So there are a lot, and I would say I probably saw 100 to 150. And I didn't go down every road, but I covered all the districts and covered a lot of back roads. But I know that there are more than that. I do think we need restrictions here, but I think that what I heard, and I think what got captured in the What We Heard report, was a recognition that this is a choice that people are making around affordability, not totally, but to a larger extent, around affordability. But I do think as a municipality, we have a responsibility to ensure that the health of our residents is protected. And that means that we do need to regard treatment of gray and black water in a way that's reasonable. And I think there are some options within that are not overly expensive and that I don't think are going to cause undue problems for people. I think it's a reasonable expectation that if you're going to live in that, then we need to be assured that those issues are taken care of. So I do favor, option 3 with the provision that we're looking at the number of days to confirm that we're not just upending people who are using these as summer cottages, so to speak, and that we are looking at them from a permanent choice in a housing situation. Is there anything else that anyone wants to say? Because we are now at 3:15. Yes, Councillor Reinhardt.
With option 2, if a development permit is required after 30 or 60 or 90 days, would that be difficult to get? Like what would they have to do? Like, would there be, do you know what I'm saying? Okay.
You're right, yeah. This is not straightforward. We probably wouldn't get everyone getting a permit submitted because they didn't know they needed to. So most of the time, the process works smoothly because people know they need a building permit. And as part of that, they get a development permit as well. So we have the check on the zoning and the land use at the same time as we're checking the building. But these are not buildings. They don't fall under the building code. And so the requirement for a development permit would probably require, some education around that requirement. And there would also be, we may get calls that said, oh, I noticed this is happening, things like that. And so that may be how we get some of it, but it's not as straightforward a process. And I don't think that we would get everyone coming in knowing that they needed to submit a development permit.
Councillor Smith.
Very last question. My understanding all along was that we had to enforce the septic regulations from the province. Is this, if we choose an option where we have no municipal oversight on septic, is the province going to accept that?
Yes, and there's no requirement for the municipality to do anything here that relates to septic because Department of Environment regulates all of that. Like, it's not legal to dump gray water and black water and things like that already. And, when we approve buildings, then we have that requirement that they have an approved septic system. So when people are doing a normal house, there is that piece where we won't issue the approval. But at the end of the day, whether people choose to have whatever, if they have holding tanks and get them pumped, then they're already following Department's of Environment's requirements. They don't have anything that we have to do or not do.
Anyone who sees someone dumping, they can report it to the Department of Environment, and the Department of Environment will send out an inspector and follow up, right?
I don't know how they work when they do that, but yes, that's how it should work.
Yeah, can we just do a quick poll so we have some sense, because we've had some discussion. Option 1, hands up. 3, okay. Option 2, none. Option 3, okay. Option 2,
With 90 days.
Yeah, it depends on the days. That's
Okay.
where,
2, and the number 3. 3. Oh, well, that was really decisive, wasn't it? Like all of it, we're all very decisive. We're going to have to get to being very decisive at some point, but for now, it's a process. It's a process. Twos and threes, okay. Thank you to the planning staff. Your patience and understanding are really appreciated, and your work to present this in a way that really helps our focus of our discussion is really valuable. So thank you very much for this. To be continued, because the next piece is on RV parks, and that will generate good discussion. And we'll have a discussion on inland waterways, which will also, when we're a little fresher than we are at this point in the day, will be good. So we'll tackle this next week. That is it for this portion of the meeting. We're not, are we recessing again? Or we're going to adjourn? We should, there's no further business on the agenda. We stand adjourned, and we'll reconvene for a special discussion. On the budget.